The opening scene of the Vanishing Game, also known as the House on Straw Hill, is a chilling and enigmatic sequence that immediately sets the tone for the film's psychological horror and mystery. It begins in near darkness, with only dim lighting revealing the silhouette of a woman as she is violently strangled by an unseen assailant. The camera lingers on her terrified face, her desperate gasps for air, and the brutal efficiency of the killer's grip, creating an atmosphere of dread and helplessness. Once the woman goes limp, the killer carefully wraps her lifeless body in thick plastic sheeting, methodically sealing her inside as if preserving evidence or preparing for disposal. The sound of the plastic crinkling adds an eerie, almost mundane quality to the act, making it even more disturbing. The killer then drags the wrapped corpse away, the body leaving a faint trail as it disappears into the shadows. The scene ends abruptly, leaving the audience with no explanation, only the unsettling sense that this murder is just the beginning. This opening sequence establishes several key elements of the film's narrative. First, it introduces the central mystery. Who is this killer, and why are they targeting women? The lack of identity, we never see the murderer's face, creates immediate suspense, suggesting that the killer could be anyone, even someone we meet later. Second, the cold, almost clinical nature of the murder hints at a calculated mind at work, raising questions about whether this is a personal vendetta or part of a larger, more sinister game. Most importantly, the scene plants a seed of psychological unease that carries through the rest of the film. When the protagonist, Paul Martin, later experiences hallucinations of a woman wrapped in plastic, just like this victim, it blurs the line between reality and paranoia. Is he seeing the ghost of this murdered woman? Is he somehow connected to her death? Or is his traumatized mind conjuring these images as a manifestation of guilt or fear? By opening with such a stark and unexplained act of violence, The Vanishing Game pulls the audience into its disorienting world where nothing is certain, and the truth may be far more twisted than it first appears. The murder lingers as a ghostly presence throughout the film, a puzzle piece that refuses to fit until the very end, if at all. The film's mood shifts from the cold brutality of the opening murder to an uneasy quiet as Paul Martin, a troubled writer played with haunted intensity by Udo Kier, arrives at the remote Straw Hill house. The countryside setting is picturesque, yet strangely oppressive. Rolling hills and dense forests surround the property, but instead of tranquility, there's an immediate sense of isolation. The house itself looms like a forgotten relic, its creaking floors and shadowy corners suggesting it holds more secrets than shelter. Paul steps out of his car, his movements cautious, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if expecting danger. He carries a gun, an immediate red flag, and his tense demeanor suggests he's not just here to write, he's hiding. The camera lingers on his face, capturing flickers of anxiety and exhaustion, hinting at a man already on the edge. When he enters the house, the emptiness echoes, every footstep reverberating, making the silence feel alive. The realtor, a minor but significant presence, hands him the keys with polite indifference, oblivious to Paul's unease. Their brief exchange is mundane, yet Paul's clipped responses and darting glances make it clear he wants no small talk. He wants to be left alone. But the question lingers. Why? Is he running from someone, or is his own mind his worst enemy? As he explores the house, the cinematography amplifies the growing dread. Wide shots emphasize his solitude, while tight close-ups on doorknobs, windows, and darkened hallways make the environment feel like a silent observer. There's no overt threat, yet the atmosphere is thick with tension. Something is off. The house isn't just a setting, it's a character, one that seems to breathe alongside Paul, waiting for his sanity to unravel. This scene is crucial because it establishes Paul as an unreliable protagonist. Is he truly in danger, or is his paranoia a product of trauma? The gun, the nervous glances, the way he flinches at ordinary sounds, all of it suggests a man who has already been broken before the real horror even begins. By the time he settles in, the audience is left wondering, is this house his refuge or his prison? And more importantly, what is he really running from? The answer, like everything in the Vanishing Game, won't be straightforward. But from this moment on, the line between reality and delusion begins to blur, pulling both Paul and the audience deeper into the mystery. The arrival of Linda, the enigmatic housekeeper, shatters the uneasy solitude of Straw Hill House, injecting the film with a charged mix of eroticism and psychological unease. Played with hypnotic allure by Linda Hayden, Linda doesn't merely enter the story, she slinks into it, her presence immediately altering the atmosphere. From the moment she steps into frame, there's something unsettling about her, a calculated ambiguity in her smile, a knowing glint in her eyes that suggests she's playing a role rather than simply fulfilling domestic duties. Paul's first interaction with Linda is laced with tension. She's polite, almost too accommodating, yet her gaze lingers just a second too long, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she's testing his boundaries. The camera lingers on her, tight shots of her lips as she speaks, her hands smoothing down her dress, the way she leans just slightly too close when passing him a cup of tea. There's an unspoken challenge in her demeanor, as though she's daring him to acknowledge the electricity between them. But Linda isn't just a seductress. She's an enigma wrapped in provocation. Her behavior oscillates between submissive housekeeper and something far more predatory. At night, Paul hears faint noises, footsteps outside his door, the creak of a floorboard, only to find Linda standing there, watching him. When confronted, she offers a coy excuse, but the damage is done. The seed of doubt is planted. Is she trying to seduce him, or is she stalking him? The film's erotic undertones come to a head in a scene where Linda, draped in a sheer nightgown, openly flirts with Paul. The tension is thick, but it's not purely sexual. There's something performative about her actions, as if she's following a script only she knows. When Paul reacts with a mix of desire and aggression, grabbing her violently before snapping out of it, Linda's reaction is chillingly calm. She doesn't scream or flee, she simply smiles, as if this was exactly what she wanted. This dynamic raises unsettling questions. Is Linda a femme fatale manipulating Paul for her own ends? Is she a figment of his unraveling mind? Or is she part of a larger, more sinister game? Her presence destabilizes Paul's already fragile psyche, blurring the line between reality and paranoia. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word feels like a trap, one that Paul and the audience can't quite decipher. By the time Linda's true motives begin to surface, or seem to, the film has already ensnared the viewer in its web of deception. Linda isn't just a character, she's a catalyst, a living embodiment of the film's central mystery. And like everything in the Vanishing Game, the truth about her may be far more terrifying than Paul or the audience could ever anticipate. From the moment Paul Martin steps foot in Straw Hill House, the walls between perception and reality begin to dissolve. His hallucinations arrive not as fleeting daydreams, but as full sensory assaults that shake the foundations of his already fragile psyche. The film masterfully constructs these visions with such visceral intensity that we, the audience, find ourselves questioning the nature of reality alongside our troubled protagonist. The first manifestations creep in subtly, a fleeting shadow where none should be, a whisper just beyond hearing range. But soon the visions take on horrifying clarity. A woman's corpse, wrapped in the same plastic shroud as the opening victim, appears at the foot of his bed, her dead eyes staring accusingly. Paul's violent recoil mirrors our own shock, and when the apparition vanishes, we're left wondering if we truly saw it, or if the film has pulled us into Paul's unraveling mind. The house itself seems to conspire against him. His typewriter springs to demonic life, its keys hammering out ominous messages without human touch. The words, "I know what you did," repeat endlessly, the mechanical clatter building to a crescendo that drowns out rational thought. Is this supernatural phenomena, or the externalization of Paul's own guilt? The film refuses easy answers, maintaining an exquisite tension between psychological and paranormal explanations. Most terrifying are the nighttime visitations. A faceless figure, perhaps the killer from the opening, perhaps something worse, presses against the window, its breath fogging the glass. When Paul fires his gun in panic, the figure disappears without trace, leaving no bullet holes, no footprints, just the echo of Paul's ragged breathing. These sequences are shot with chilling realism, the camera lingering just long enough for us to question whether we glimpsed something before it vanished. The hallucinations reach their peak when Linda becomes their vessel. In one heart-stopping moment, her face distorts grotesquely mid-conversation, her features melting into something inhuman before snapping back to normal. Paul's reaction, a mixture of terror and desperate self-doubt, mirrors our own confusion. Has he truly witnessed something supernatural, or is his traumatized mind constructing elaborate delusions? What makes these sequences so profoundly unsettling is their ambiguity. The film plants enough evidence to support both interpretations, that Paul is experiencing a psychotic break, or that the house is genuinely haunted by malevolent forces. This deliberate uncertainty creates a pervasive sense of dread that lingers long after the credits roll. By the time Paul's grip on reality has slipped beyond recovery, we realize with dawning horror that we may have lost our bearings right along with him. In this masterclass of psychological horror, the true terror lies not in the hallucinations themselves, but in the irreversible erosion of certainty. Whether products of a broken mind or manifestations of supernatural evil, these visions have achieved their purpose. They've made Paul, and by extension the audience, question every shadow, every sound, and ultimately the very nature of reality itself. The arrival of the photographer at Straw Hill House acts as a catalyst that fractures the already precarious balance of Paul's isolated world. Unlike the ambiguous hallucinations that plague him, this visitor is undeniably real. Flesh and blood, with a camera instead of a weapon, yet somehow more threatening in his ordinariness. His presence doesn't just disrupt Paul's solitude, it exposes the fragile scaffolding of Paul's sanity, revealing cracks we hadn't noticed before. From the moment the photographer introduces himself as working on a countryside series, there's an unsettling dissonance between his pleasant demeanor and the invasive nature of his work. His camera clicks like a predatory insect, capturing images that feel less like art and more like surveillance. When he turns his lens on Linda, the dynamic shifts dangerously. Her willingness to pose in increasingly provocative positions creates a silent power struggle between the two men, with Linda as both prize and puppeteer. The scene takes on a voyeuristic quality that mirrors our own position as audience members. As the photographer arranges Linda in various states of undress against the decaying backdrop of the house, We become uncomfortably aware that we're watching a predator at work. But which man is truly dangerous? The photographer with his intrusive lens, or Paul with his mounting paranoia and barely contained violence? The camera lingers on the triangular tension between them, each glance and gesture loaded with unspoken threats. What makes this encounter so profoundly disturbing is how it blurs the line between art and violation. The photographer's cheerful banter about lighting and angles contrasts grotesquely with the intimacy he's stealing through his viewfinder. Linda's apparent enjoyment of the attention only heightens Paul's agitation, her flirtatious smiles serving as gasoline on the fire of his jealousy. When the photographer casually mentions recognizing Paul from the incident in London, the scene tilts into outright menace. Is this truly a chance encounter, or has the outside world finally come to collect its debt? By the time the photographer packs his equipment and leaves, the damage is done. His visit has introduced an element of concrete reality into Paul's spiraling fantasy, forcing us to question everything we've seen before. Were Paul's earlier hallucinations symptoms of mental illness or premonitions of this invasion? The photographer's departure leaves behind not peace, but a more profound unease. Because now we understand that the real horror may not be inside Paul's mind after all, but waiting patiently just beyond the frame, ready to develop its terrible truth in the dark room of Straw Hill House. The film takes a dangerous turn as the simmering tension between Paul and Linda erupts in a sequence that blurs the boundaries between passion, violence, and hallucination. What begins as a charged seduction spirals into something far more unsettling. An encounter where neither the characters nor the audience can fully distinguish lust from threat, reality from delusion. The scene unfolds with Linda's calculated provocation. She moves through the dimly lit house like a specter of desire, her presence both alluring and invasive. When she appears at Paul's door in a diaphanous nightgown, the air thickens with unspoken danger. Her gaze is predatory, her touch deliberate. She isn't just tempting him, she's testing him, pushing him toward a breaking point. The camera lingers on their bodies, not in the manner of traditional eroticism, but with a clinical detachment that makes every caress feel like a prelude to violence. And then, the shift. Paul's hands, moments ago trembling with restrained desire, close around Linda's throat. The transition is sudden, brutal. His face contorts with something beyond rage, something primal and unfiltered. The sound of her choked gasps fills the room, the scene playing out in a horrifying slow motion that makes it impossible to look away. Just as quickly, the moment fractures. Paul jerks awake in his bed, drenched in sweat, the echo of Linda's strangled breath still hanging in the air. But the nightmare isn't over. Later, he witnesses, or believes he witnesses, Linda entangled with the photographer in a grotesque parody of intimacy. Their bodies move in the shadows, but there's nothing sensual about it. The act feels performative, almost mocking, as if staged for Paul's torment. The scene is shot through his perspective, the edges of the frame warping as his grip on reality slips further. Is this really happening, or is it another manifestation of his unraveling psyche? These encounters are not about sex. They're about power, control, and the terrifying fluidity of perception. Linda becomes a mirror for Paul's deepest fears, his guilt, his paranoia, his latent violence. Every touch, every glance, every act of supposed passion carries the threat of annihilation. By the time the sequence ends, we're left with a chilling question. Is Linda a willing participant in this dance of destruction, or is she merely another figment of Paul's disintegrating mind, a phantom conjured to punish him for sins we don't yet understand? The line between the erotic and the horrific has not just been crossed, it has been obliterated. And in its place, something far darker slithers in. The tension that has been simmering beneath the surface of the Vanishing Game finally erupts in a scene of brutal violence that shatters any remaining certainty about what is real and what is hallucination. The second murder is not just a plot point. It's a psychological grenade, detonating Paul's fragile grip on reality and pulling the audience deeper into the film's labyrinth of paranoia. It begins with Paul witnessing the photographer's death, or at least he believes he does. The act itself is swift and savage. A masked figure, its face obscured like something out of a nightmare, emerges from the shadows and attacks the photographer with methodical precision. The camera doesn't flinch. It lingers on the violence, forcing us to watch as the photographer's body convulses, then goes still. The killer drags the corpse away, leaving behind only a smear of blood and the echo of Paul's ragged breathing. But when Paul rushes to investigate, the body is gone. No blood stain, no sign of struggle, just the empty house, its silence now deafening. The absence of evidence is more disturbing than the murder itself. Was this another hallucination, a projection of Paul's unraveling mind? Or is someone, Linda, an unseen assailant, the house itself, playing a cruel game with him, staging murders only to erase them like chalk from a blackboard? The scene's horror lies in its ambiguity. The film toys with us, offering just enough detail to make the murder feel real. The wet sound of the knife, the photographer's choked gasp, while simultaneously undermining it with the lack of proof. It's a masterstroke of psychological terror, forcing us to question not just Paul's sanity, but our own perception of events. If we can't trust what we see, what can we trust? By the time the sequence ends, the stakes have shifted irrevocably. The photographer's disappearance, or death, leaves Paul isolated, with no witnesses to corroborate his story. The outside world, already distant, now feels entirely out of reach. And as the walls of Straw Hill House close in around him, one thing becomes chillingly clear. Whether real or imagined, the violence is escalating, and the next victim might not vanish so cleanly. The film's carefully constructed illusions finally shatter in a revelation that forces both Paul and the audience to question everything they've witnessed up to this point. What begins as a desperate search for answers becomes a nightmare of self-discovery when Paul stumbles upon a hidden room in Straw Hill House, a grotesque gallery of mannequins and photographs, each one depicting murdered women in poses eerily reminiscent of his hallucinations. The room is a physical manifestation of Paul's unraveling psyche. The mannequins, dressed in tattered clothing, stand frozen in silent accusation, their blank eyes seeming to follow him as he moves through the space. The photographs pinned to the walls reveal a horrifying pattern. Women wrapped in plastic, their faces contorted in fear, their bodies arranged in the same way as the visions that have been haunting him. The most disturbing realization dawns slowly. These are not random victims. They are women Paul recognizes, or at least his subconscious does. The twist is not just that these murders are real, but that Paul himself may be at the center of them. The film toys with the idea of repressed guilt, suggesting that his hallucinations were never mere figments of imagination, but fragments of buried memories clawing their way to the surface. The room's existence implies a level of premeditation that chills to the bone. Was Paul lured here to confront his own crimes? Or is this an elaborate setup designed to break him? The scene's power lies in its ambiguity. As Paul sifts through the photographs, his hands trembling, the line between perpetrator and victim blurs. Is he a killer suffering from amnesia, or a pawn in someone else's sadistic game? The room's contents suggest both possibilities, leaving the audience as disoriented as Paul himself. The mannequins, with their lifeless stares, become silent witnesses to his mounting terror, their presence amplifying the sense that he is being watched, judged, by forces beyond his control. By the time Paul flees the room, the truth feels both closer and more elusive than ever. The twist doesn't provide answers, it deepens the mystery, forcing us to reconsider every interaction, every hallucination, every moment of violence through a new and more disturbing lens. The walls of Straw Hill House no longer feel like a prison. They feel like a funhouse mirror, reflecting back a version of Paul that he no longer recognizes. And as the film hurtles toward its climax, one thing becomes terrifyingly clear. The real Vanishing Game isn't happening to Paul, it's happening inside him. The film's mounting tension reaches its crescendo in a climactic confrontation where reality and madness collide with devastating consequences. Paul, now fully consumed by paranoia and terror, faces off against Linda. But nothing is as it seems. The scene unfolds with a dreamlike intensity, where every revelation feels like a fresh betrayal and every truth carries the weight of a lie. The confrontation begins in the shadowy bowels of Straw Hill House, where Paul, armed with desperate fury, corners Linda. Her demeanor has shifted, no longer the coy housekeeper or seductive temptress, but something colder, more calculating. She speaks in riddles that feel like psychological traps, her words laced with eerie detachment. "You still don't remember, do you?" she asks, her voice almost pitying. The question hangs in the air like a guillotine blade. As Paul demands answers, the film peels back layers of deception. Linda reveals fragments of a larger scheme, that she was sent to Straw Hill House not by chance, but with purpose. Someone from Paul's past, a specter he can't quite grasp, orchestrated this entire nightmare. But before she can fully explain, a masked figure emerges from the darkness, the same killer from Paul's visions, now undeniably real. The fight that follows is brutal and chaotic, a whirlwind of slashing shadows and guttural screams. What makes this confrontation so harrowing is its refusal to provide clear resolution. Even as Paul grapples with the masked assailant, the film toys with perception. Is this truly happening? Or is this another layer of psychological torture? The house itself seems to participate in the violence, its walls closing in, its corridors shifting like a living maze. Linda watches from the periphery, her expression unreadable. Complicit or captive, it's impossible to say. When the struggle reaches its peak, the mask is torn away, but the face beneath is obscured, a fleeting glimpse swallowed by darkness. The ambiguity is deliberate, a final twist of the knife. Has Paul been hunting a ghost, or has he been the monster all along? The scene ends not with answers, but with a chilling sense of inevitability, that some truths are too terrible to survive, and some games can only end in annihilation. By the time the confrontation dissolves into the film's surreal finale, the line between hunter and hunted has vanished entirely. The real horror isn't the violence or even the mystery, it's the dawning realization that Paul's mind, like Straw Hill House, is a hall of mirrors. And in the end, no reflection can be trusted. The final moments of the Vanishing Game do not bring resolution, they dissolve it. The film's conclusion is a masterstroke of psychological horror, leaving Paul and the audience suspended in a liminal space between truth and delusion, where every possible interpretation feels like both an answer and a deception. The sequence begins in the aftermath of the violent confrontation, with Paul staggering through the house, his body battered, his mind fractured. The camera follows him with a detached, almost ghostly perspective, as if we are no longer watching a man but the shadow of one. The house, once a prison of paranoia, now feels like a purgatory. Its halls stretch unnaturally, doors lead nowhere, and the air hums with a dissonant silence. Then comes the final twist, or rather, the absence of one. Paul encounters Linda one last time, but she is no longer the enigmatic seductress or the potential villain. Instead, she regards him with something between pity and indifference, as if he is already dead and just hasn't realized it yet. "It's over," she says, but the words are hollow. Over for whom? For Paul? For her? For the game itself? The film refuses to clarify. The last shot lingers on Paul's face as he stands in the doorway of Straw Hill House, the outside world a blur of indistinct light. His expression is unreadable. Terror, realization, resignation, or perhaps nothing at all. Then, with deliberate cruelty, the film cuts to black. No epiphany, no closure, no final scare, just silence. This ending is not a puzzle to be solved. It is an abyss to be stared into. By denying concrete answers, the film forces us to confront the unsettling possibility that some horrors have no explanation, that madness and reality are not opposing forces, but reflections of one another. Whether Paul was a victim, a killer, or merely a pawn in someone else's game ceases to matter. What lingers is the dread of the unanswered question, the nightmare of uncertainty. In the end, the vanishing game doesn't just vanish, it evaporates, leaving behind only the echo of a scream no one heard and a truth no one can prove. The real horror isn't in what we've seen, but in what we'll never know. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.